I'm going to try and explain to you what I've been doing for the last 2-3 years. I'm sort of wearing two hats for this conversation. One of them is from a group called the Awareness Foundation, which I set up about 2-3 years ago when I got locked down in Spain due to the pandemic that apparently happened. While I was over there, I had plenty of time on my hands, and one of the things I started to do was look into problems that were flying around on Telegram, etc., and then try and find some solutions to it. And one of the things that I'd been investigating in the lead up to all of it was the banking issues. And my background over the last 20 odd years or so has been in investment finance, and I'd actually done an investigation into the top 50 banks leading up to COVID. And we went through 10 years of their annual accounts, looking at what sort of state the banking world was in. And at the end of 2019, we come up with some numbers from their figures, not from ours, which basically showed that of the top 50 banks in the world, that if 1% of clients walked through the door and said, "Could I have my money?" every one of them would go bankrupt. And sort of leading into COVID, I started telling people this, and most people sort of said to me, "Well, that's never going to happen. The banks are never going to crash. You know, it's just never going to happen." And nowadays, most people sort of say to me, "Well, which one's going to go next?" Well, at the moment, there's been a bit of a sort of a calm before what I believe is going to be another big storm coming up very shortly. Now, at the end of 2019, if you'd actually sort of searched around and looked for the banks, you'd have found that Deutsche Bank, who in their figures at the end of 2019 owed 7,500 times more money than they ever took on deposit. So they were due to go bankrupt in March 2020. So if you'd actually ever searched at the end of 2019, you'd have found it all over the place. Then COVID started in November 2020 and then hit Europe around February 2020. And in March 2020, some of the biggest governments in the world printed more money in 1 month. And then if you take America, for example, they printed more money in July of 2020 than they did in 200 years leading up to it. So we've actually got a banking system and a whole mess that we actually possibly don't realise has a lot more control over us than we actually realise. And the central banking system, which everybody thinks is owned by the governments, like the Bank of England, for example. Many people think that the Bank of England is part of England. It's actually not even a bank, and it isn't part of England, and it's not even in the United Kingdom. Now, the Bank of England was set up many, many years ago as the first central bank. The largest central bank in the world now is the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve has created around $12 trillion since the beginning of COVID, which is about 40% of all US dollars in circulation. Now, you might wonder why I'm wittering on about money and wondering what does that do and how does it affect you. But I'm sure you're pretty much aware of the CBDC, central bank digital currencies. If you're not aware of those, there is a plan to bring in an electronic currency, a digital currency. And the only way really to get people to adopt it is to break the thing that you're currently used to. So, you will have seen, I don't know if it's been spoken about today, cash is king and you should use cash. The problem is they want to eliminate cash. Not that cash is actually worth anything, because those pieces of paper we carry around in our pocket are printed out of thin air by the Bank of England and people like that. And they print them at face value and lend them to governments and banks. So when you wonder how does Deutsche Bank actually lend 7,500 times more money than it takes in deposit, it's because the banks basically lie to you. Now, I sort of stumbled across this at the end of 2018 and found myself telling people about the fact that the banks were going to crash. And most people said it's never going to happen. But it's all well and good sort of scaring people going, the banks are going to crash, but what do you do about it? The only real solution to the problem is to create an alternative to the problem. And basically, I've been involved in the last 2 or 3 years, and I'm going to tell you about something else in a second I'm involved in, about actually rebuilding everything from scratch. And I mean everything. Everything we do, our food supply, our money supply, our health, our education, everything. Because the problem we have is that we rely upon systems and services that are supplied by a bunch of people that are controlling us. And actually, one of the biggest problems that a lot of us have is that we don't really look into it, or if you do look into it, you can sound like a conspiracy theorist when you try and explain it to people. So one of the things that I'm going to highlight today, or ask you today, I regularly do presentations, not talks like this. So again, apologies because this isn't really my thing, but I regularly do presentations explaining to people problems and solutions. And one of the problems that I've sort of stumbled across is that many people are fed up with the system but don't really know what to do about it. And you heard Piers Corbyn earlier saying, don't comply, don't pay ULEZ. Now, that's right, don't pay them, and not because you want to protest, but because you don't owe it. But the biggest problem that many people have is that they're scared of the people that we're up against. And then it's a case of what do you do about it when you're scared? But do you even know who you're up against? So I'm going to ask a quick question. If you can give me a show of hands, how many people here believe the government run the United Kingdom? Can you show your hand? Give me a hand if you believe that this country is run by the government. There's one hand there. Okay.
They say that they're supposed to.
Allegedly. So allegedly we vote people into power and they're in charge. Well, they're not really. And if you actually dig into it, you'll realise that the voting system is completely corrupt. The people that are in charge are not even what they say they are. They're actually limited companies. So for example, people like Sadiq Khan, people like Rishi Sunak, people like any member of the opposition, they are all limited companies. Now that may seem to you like, well, maybe, so what? But the reality is that you think you have a leader leading or ruling or controlling, or call it whatever you like, that are men or women that basically you put into power and they're supposed to look after you. Now, here's another question. How many people, if they were going to create a country tomorrow, would vote for a leader to tell you how to live your life? Would anybody actually vote for that? Please, could you go into power and not look after me, not do things for me that I don't want to do, tell me what to do, and keep fining me when I don't do what you tell me to do? Now, let me just explain to you about something that's just creeping through the parliament of all these people that are in charge. There's a new thing called an energy bill that's been rushed through since they opened a couple of weeks ago. And it hasn't quite got royal assent yet, but it's nearly there. And in it, these are two things that this new energy bill say that the power of those people that they have against you. One of them is that they can come into your house using reasonable force to change your meter in your house to a smart meter. That's apparently in your best interest. And another thing is if you don't comply, they can fine you up to £15,000 or possibly put you in jail for up to 1 year. This is in a bill that apparently is in your best interest, run by a bunch of people that you think possibly don't run the country. So if you think about it, if they don't run the country, in your opinion, we only had one hand at the people that said that they run the country, why do you listen to them? Why do you do what they tell you to do? What makes you feel that you should? Is it because you're scared? And if you're scared, what are you scared of? Who are you scared of? Now, once you've worked that one out, then you can work out what to do about it. Most of the time, your fear comes from your own problem. You're the fear. You go, this is going to happen to me if I don't do as they say. You open their envelopes, you agree with what they say, and you think that you have to do what you say. You really don't. You really don't owe them anything. Because again, it comes back to why would you do it? So the reality is you've got to look at it and say, how do they control you? They control you with one of two things: threats and charges. Money comes back to that money supply thing, and that's what they do, is they control you with money. Now the way that they control you is they have the ability to print money out of thin air. So what they can actually do is that they can just keep fixing problems that you don't have the same advantage over. You have to give your time for a certain amount of something or other that allows you to buy a certain amount of something or other that allows you to survive. They just print it out of thin air and lend it to themselves at face value. And then they decide the interest rates, or someone does, someone above the government, decides the interest rates and then penalises you with it. Now that whole mess, believe it or not, is coming to an end. That has come to an end hundreds of times, if not thousands of times, over thousands of years, if you believe history. So one of the other things that I did when we were looking into the banks was we investigated money and how it actually has gone round and round in circles over thousands of years. How the Romans fell, how the Chinese Ming dynasty fell, how major empires fall. And they all fall for the same reason. They lose control of their money supply. And their money supply becomes worthless because no one trusts it. And when you print money at the levels that they've been printing money, eventually people lose control and no one trusts it. And we're at a stage at the moment where you've got places like China and Russia and the BRICS allegedly creating an alternative to this phantom money supply. They're really not. It's another story that they're going to supply this money supply backed by gold, and it's not. If you actually investigate the BRICS currencies, you'll find that they're gold linked, not gold backed. So actually it's another smoke and mirrors from a bunch of other people that will make you think there's an alternative to the thing that is already broken. And eventually, somewhere along the way, they will go, it's all gone wrong and we need to replace it with something new, which is what they've always done. Over thousands of years, every time it goes wrong, eventually it's replaced with something completely different. That completely different is a thing called central bank digital currencies. And central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, are when the government get to create an electronic currency, or not the government because it's not them, and they basically convince you with one of two things: either incentivize you or threaten you to have it, or destroy you and ask for you to take it back. So for example, if your money in the bank tomorrow, if your bank shut the bank down and went, your money's gone, sorry, you can't have it, it broke, what would you do? Let's assume it happened tonight. How much money would you lose? If the government or someone that looked like the government said to you the following day, I'll give you your money back if you take it in another format, an electronic currency, would you take it? Ask yourself honestly, would you say no? Would you just go, no, don't need your toys, I'm not going to know? You are basically at the perils of them if you use their systems. And that is the problem that we all have. And it starts with a money supply. Now, when you look at the money supply and you go, okay, well, who's in charge of that thing? People hear of the government, the Bank of England governor, the central bank digital currencies are coming from the central banking system. There is an organisation called the Bank of International Settlements that is in charge of all the central banks. It's run by a guy called Augustine Carstens, that in October of 2020, in the middle of COVID, bearing in mind that in the middle of COVID, everyone was supposedly panicking about dying, this man stood up in October 2020 and said to everybody in the world, that anyone that was listening, we need to eliminate cash because we don't really know what everyone does with it. And we need to replace it with some technology that gives us ultimate control over people. That's pretty much his words, not mine. And that was in October 2020, and that's the Bank of International Settlements. But people think, is that the top of the tree? Is that who runs the central banking system? Now I'm going to give you a name today. You may have heard this name before, you may have not. There's a guy called Pepe Orsini, O-R-S-I-N-I, Pepe Orsini, look him up. He is known as the Grey Pope, and he is in charge of the central banking system, and he's in charge of a group called the Knights of Malta. Now, if you look at the Knights of Malta, you'll find one of their flags is the St. George's Cross. And the St. George's Cross is, in theory, our patron saint of this country. We are controlled by people way above the eyesight of what you can see. And there are many, many people concerned about whether you can actually beat them in their system. If you go to their courts, and I've been to their courts, you will more often than not lose because you A, won't know their rules, and B, they more often than not won't let you speak. So you can't beat them because the only person that can actually speak in there is a barrister that is part of their rules, or you if you feel competent enough to have that argument against them when they keep pulling out of the hat things like case law and various bits and pieces. So really the only way to deal with this is to go, thank you very much, we're going to put your toys down and we're not going to play with them anymore. We're going to build something completely new. Thank you. So one of the things that the Awareness Foundation was investigating, because I was a bit fed up with all of this mess a couple of years ago, I started looking into building my own country and going and hiding somewhere on an island and waiting for the world to get back to normal. And in the process of investigating countries and how to build one, basically, I won't bore you with it today, but you can find more information about it if you want to look. Go on the Awareness Foundation, go on what is called the republicofengland.com. And you will find that about 18 months ago, myself and a group like me had basically worked out that England structurally does not exist, nor does the United Kingdom. And about 18 months ago, we actually worked out what countries actually should look like and recreated England in the form of the Republic of England. Now, it might sound like a crazy thing to do, but ultimately, one of the things that you can do, believe it or not, is actually decide who governs you. So we decided the best people to govern us was us, all of us. And we have created an entity for this country. So if they want to play with countries, we've created our own one with our rules, our stuff, And we're basically not playing their games anymore. So if you'd like to know more about it, go on the republicofengland.com. If you're on Telegram, you can find us on there. It's republicofengland.com. And you can find out a little bit more about how to tell these people to get stuffed politely. You know, they want to play their games, let them. We're not playing. I'm not playing their games. I'm not complying. I'm not listening to them. If they come near my door, I give them a polite reason to go home, and they go. And the reason they go is because they actually don't have any power over us. The government does not run this country. And if you just look into people like the World Economic Forum, the United Nations, Pepe Orsini, you'll find the people that do. And when you realise the people that are behind this, you'll realise why we have to do something about it. If we don't do something about it, at some point, those toys that they keep controlling us with, eventually they'll end us with. So if you're bothered about it, like some of us are, and I'm sure you are, or you probably wouldn't be here today, then please look into people that are building things to fix it. We need our own everything and our own ability to defend ourselves against these idiots that seem to think it's okay to tell us how to live our life. It isn't okay for them to tell us how to live our life. And if you're looking into ways to beat them, you'll stumble across things like common law and the legal system and a bunch of other stuff. It's very easy. Free, not free. When you have to ask somebody how you live your life, you're not free. That's called slavery. If you don't want to be a slave, stand up, tell the person telling you what to do, thanks very much for your invite, I'm not playing. The end. And walk off. And walk off like you mean it. Because they will just realise that they've lost their power. That's me.